Hello and welcome to Mastering Dungeons. I'm Sean Merwin here with my co-host and person who keeps this show going, Teos Avadia. Hey, Teos, how's it going?
Hello, Sean. You're far too kind. You know this is a team activity, and
Yes,
some
yes,
days one of us is more sleepy than the other.
this is true. This is true. Or focused or less sober than the other. And
And today I had extra time to let's say argue, though that's a strong word, with Mike Shea. So I'm going to try to be non-argumentative about the DCs of ropes and such topics, and
sounds good.
stay teamwork oriented here.
You know you're living your best life if you can take your holidays and just to argue with Sly Flourish, Mike Shea.
It's true. It is Labor Day, and I've done some labor.
Yes, some hard time in the Mike Shea argument minds. Good
Indeed, indeed.
stuff. Good stuff. Well, we're going to jump right into the news then. With, would you believe
Do you
it?
really want to jump right into the news?
It is not D&D branded sandwich meat, but
No.
it is a Wizards of the Coast branded UK football team. ICV2 is reporting that Wizards of the Coast will sponsor the Leyton Orient FC football soccer team, a lower league East London soccer team. They will wear Magic the Gathering logos on their training gear, which could lead to appearance on their commercialized team sportswear. And yeah, so why not?
I mean, it's one of those things that you're just like, what happened to cause this? Like, what's the okay? Whatever. It's not a prominent team. It's
Right.
a lower league, so it's unclear why. And it's like maybe eventually you could get sports gear. I don't know, but there it is. And
Yep.
maybe it's just one of those, like this is a wonderful go-getter team, and
Yeah.
Wizards found a reason to. I don't know.
Well, they do have a branch in London. So maybe there's a connection between the London branch, some of the employees there, maybe, and
That
and
could
uh,
be.
and the squad. Yeah. All I know is until we get the Seattle Seahawks of the NFL changing their name to the Seattle Beholders, I don't want to hear anything else.
I mean, we do have the Krakens, so it's
Yeah.
it's Seattle does have some good names there, and some obvious partnerships that could happen down the road. So we'll see.
Yep. We're holding our breath, but not continually. Uh,
That's okay.
yeah. Next news: the DM's challenge is down to the three finalists. So we're at week 6, and stage 2 is now over. The three finalists are Brad Thompson, Andrew Bashinsky, and Sergio Solizano. Yeah,
Yes,
go ahead, take it
there
away.
was a there was a video on this which gave a little more info on the process. We do have one Wizards of the Cast staff member who is there, Wizards of the Coast staff member who's there, Amanda Hammond. She has been reviewing along with Jennifer Kretschmer and B. Dave Walters, two excellent folks. So they're the three judges who review the contestants' works. And one thing that's good is in this era of the internet, it's really easy to know people.
Mhm.
And like I think a number of us, if we look at the list of people who were in this competition, you recognize some names. So they're doing it in a blind way. They don't see the name of the person when they review a submission. So I think that's really good.
Mhm.
And so now we've reached the end, and we have these three finalists. And apparently, what they're going to do is they're going to run an encounter for the three judges, plus Christina Ariel and Matthew Lillard. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then to further do the twist, you don't run your encounter, you run an encounter one of the other finalists created.
Okay.
I kind of like that part. It's one of those things where like Christine Ariel is awesome, Matthew Lillard's awesome. I don't know to what level they design encounters all the time or judge all the time or play under lots of different judges or anything else that would really help you assess these contestants.
Yeah.
But okay, like I still kind of feel, if I look at this competition, I still feel like there should be Jeremy Crawford, Chris Perkins, Dan Dillon, right? Like,
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it is what it is. It for me, it's like awards. It's like any other things where there are judges involved. It's great, and it's also not great. And take out of it what you can get, because we've all known awards shows of any stripe, whether it's role-playing games or movies or books or whatever, where a less than stellar nominee got an award for something that they shouldn't, and in some cases the obvious best thing did win. So it's, who knows, but
Yeah.
publicity wise, congratulations to the three finalists. I hope this is something that continues. And
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I do hope that they release more info from the people who have from all the contestants, because I think one of the things that I liked about Paizo's RPG Superstar back when it was going on, and I would pay attention to it, that it would showcase work and then the person's name next to it. And there are some names that I still remember from having seen their submissions and thinking, oh, that's really cool. Right. And I'd like that to be more of this, so that those folks could kind of proudly go, I did that, and
right.
It's a little easy to, I think the way this competition's happened, it's a little easy to forget who's been in it. And you don't know what they did. So you can't really.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In any creative process, there's the work and then there's the creator. And, you like to know the creator, whether it's music or art or writing, but you also want to focus on the work. And we live in a society, we live in a world where sometimes, just like with awards, right, sometimes it's more about the creator than about the work itself. And so I think you, like me, want to see the actual work. And what's in it, because that's what we're here for.
Yeah, and I think from the entertainment standpoint, the marketing standpoint, I'm down with that too. Like, I mean, I would dream of running this table of Jennifer Kretschmer, B. Dave Walters, Christina Ariel, Matthew Lillard, Amanda Hammond. Beyond the nervousness that you would have running this table, I mean, what an amazing table to run! I would certainly love that, and I would love to see this. I still think, I know I've told you this idea of mine, but I still want to see a show that someone would produce, and anyone can just take this idea and steal it, because I just want to see it, which would take the same encounter and have different tables go through it. So you see how differently the players handle it and how differently the DM plays it, but really find a way, the way that well-produced shows do, to really get into that, right? And break down and analyze those differences. I think that'd be fascinating.
It would.
And with cool players like this would be even better.
Yeah, for sure. Acquisitions Incorporated has returned to PAX West and returned to Icewind Dale. So even though PAX West has concluded, or concludes today, maybe, Acquisitions Incorporated was live once again on the big stage. There's a YouTube video up now if you would like to watch it. It was a long time ago, it feels like, that Jeremy Crawford took the heroes from Waterdeep to Icewind Dale, with a few detours, but now they are back to that storyline. So in the last 2 years, there's been the Ravnica Avernus angle. Drawn Enterprises has taken over Acquisitions Incorporated, and the heroes are now in Revel's End in the prison. I didn't watch it, but do you want to give your thoughts?
Sure. It was fun. So the first thing, as we talked about last week, was Kate Welch being DM instead of Jeremy Crawford. She did say that Jeremy would be back. It's not a permanent change, but it was cool to see Kate there. She did a great job. And this was all about cloning and the bad choices that Omen has made in the past. It was reinforced. This kind of came out on the C team, but Omen is a clone by choice, which was fun to see sort of Evelyn ask questions, since they have a romantic kind of thing. Like, wait, what? You're a clone? And and then everybody else sort of wondering, are we clones? And the answer kind of being like, no, yes, just intermittently from various NPCs.
Of course not.
Right.
Yeah.
And we also learned that Omen has a daughter. So we've got a new cast member, which is Certainty Dran. Quarter Aasimar, quarter elf, half human, business savvy, paranormal investigator, played by Jasmine Bular. So that was great. It was fun to see her join the cast. And they went through all this clone facility. That's how the prison has ended up being this giant clone facility, run by Drawn Enterprises. And then they seemed to be making their escape at the end, but then there was some sort of horrible metal on metal sound, which was not fully revealed as to what was going on. So we'll see whether they actually did escape Icewind Dale or they portal jumped to somewhere else. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Feywild might be a possible.
That's true, because there may be a book coming out, I've heard, about such a place. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see now that, well, the pandemic is far from over, of course, but now that there are in-person conventions happening, maybe we'll see more of the main AI storyline.
Yeah.
The virtual tabletop space is heating up with a $2.75 million venture capital investment for a brand called Roll. They did a Kickstarter in June of 2020 that raised just over $100,000. And now they have raised an additional 2.75 million, which is quite a bit more than 107,000.
Yeah, when I saw, I think I remember seeing this Kickstarter and thinking 107,000. You can't do much with that. No. And so now it's like 2.75 million. And what's interesting to me about this is, we know certain brands really well. And then there's some others that are sort of up and coming, or they're older and are trying to stay prominent, right?
Yeah.
But when you realize that one of these new ones that only raised 100,000 on Kickstarter can actually make a compelling enough case for venture capital firms to give 2.75 million, well, maybe some larger, some folks looking at this space see what it can provide, right? The case is more solid.
And for anyone who doesn't really understand venture capital, at least the venture capital folks that I've been involved with, they don't invest unless there is at least a decent chance that they're going to make not 5%, not 10%, not 20%. They're looking to make like 5% plus on their investment. So, unless this is just somebody who happens to know somebody who has a spare 2.75 million to throw around.
No, it's
business
actual
plan. Yeah,
it's actual firms, because they actually did another round between this that was sort of like angel investors, as they call it, and that tends to be your friends and someone else that you know more closely. This was actual legit. We're going to own a percentage of your company in exchange for all this.
Yep. So the business plan must have come through with something promising. And, we know that the game of D&D and all role-playing games are at an all-time high in terms of attention and in terms of money being handed over to play. With subscription models, with supplements, with maps, with all of that stuff that can be used on the virtual tabletop. It'll be interesting to see if we ever get a clear-cut industry leader. And having $3 million thrown your way is a start on making that happen. So we'll see what the future of Roll is.
And one of the things that's interesting, if you look at things like streaming, there have been a couple of platforms that have come up to try to challenge with really big money to try to do so, and then they fail to do it, right? And part of what they do with all this giant money is to sort of sway people to be exclusive to their platform. And it'll be interesting to see if we see that start happening, right? Do you start taking the known entities in this space and offer them money and positions and shows to be on your virtual tabletop platform? Does it get to that level, right? Is there that level of money and audience? I'm not sure there is, but there could be. I mean, we could easily see someone who would want to buy. We all know that, a lot of folks know Critical Role. Anything they do, if you want a piece of that, you pay big money. Because they're such an obvious eyeball getter, right? They have such hard metrics that they can do. So, if someone wanted them to be on a particular platform, that's going to require big money. But then there are levels below that you could see happening.
And the other big question is, you can play many different kinds of role-playing games on a virtual tabletop, obviously, but the obvious industry leader is D&D. And if you want to make money, you want to be able to sell the supplements on your platform. So I can just go buy the Acquisitions Incorporated hardcover book adventure on the virtual tabletop, and it's all set up for me. uh Getting the ability to do that takes money.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's another way to look at things.
Yeah, I looked at the Roll20 integration of Van Richten's, and that was impressive. Like there was good work done there, right? And things that were non-obvious had been done to make it a better experience.
Yeah.
And that's that. Yeah, like you're saying, that takes money to then make that money back.
Mm-hmm. So we'll keep an eye on that and all the other virtual tabletop news as we go forward. Speaking of virtual tabletops, Roll20 has provided a guide for first time GMs on Roll20, just in time for Gen Con, which is coming up in just a couple weeks. The Roll20 created a guide for new Roll20 players. They have one for GMs, teaching the basics of creating the game, doing a landing page, working with all the tools that Roll20 has. And this was done in collaboration with Gen Con, since Gen Con will have an online component this year and probably for many years going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about leaders, Roll20's name is going to always come up. We've seen being involved with Baldwin Games that it's by far the platform most people seem to want to sign up for and seem to want to run play games in as DMs.
Yep.
And that's interesting because it's not like DMs when you ask them or players say, oh, it's the easiest, right? In fact, they can say it takes some work, but it's sort of the most common and people who do get to know it well can do really cool things in it, right? So it's always interesting to see.
Yeah, I took about 24 hours to learn it once the pandemic started, so I could start running games at least halfway efficiently on it. So there is a learning curve, but once you get past that 8 to 10 hour mark of just constant sitting down and using it, it starts to make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea behind these guides, right? Is just show if you take a few steps, you're going to feel grounded enough that then you can take on the harder stuff. And for the Dune live stream that I was on, we used Roll20, and that was one where I thought like, wow, this game, like we're largely not using. We're not using minis. Like, what's the point of it? But actually, what was sort of interesting is that in the system, the way that either, as you know, with Star Trek or with Dune, you have this sort of way you say, I'm using this ability plus this, and I'm doing it for this reason. And so there are a couple of different factors that go into how many dice you have. And this made it just really easy and logical to go through that thought chain and speak to your DM about it. And so it actually was surprisingly helpful.
Yeah.
And when I first, we got it free, right? And so I was like, okay, we're doing this to help promote. I don't know that this is going to be helpful. And then at the end of it, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool and useful.
Yeah. There are definitely times when even when you're running at the table, people have Roll20 up to handle character interactions and stuff, rules interactions. So it is interesting. On the DMs Guild, we have Joe Raso talking about DMs Guild pricing. Joe is the creator behind supplements like the Great Dale Campaign Guide, Terror Beneath the Frozen Gate, and Dunwood, Demons, Druids, and Danger, which we reviewed at one point here on the show. So in the last 3 years, once per year, Joe's taken a look at the DMs Guild's pricing, focusing on those in the most popular DMs Guide titles product ribbon. So he points out, each year he's pointed out a few things. He points out that most products end in 99 cents or 0.95 cents. For some reason, people are more likely to buy something that has that at the end.
You still round down, right? In terms of your bank account drainage. Yeah.
Exactly. And in previous years, we saw very few products that were higher than $14.95, but this has changed in the last year. And more products are exceeding a cost of 20 cents per page, whereas in the past we were seeing much, either less or much less than that.
Yeah, it's all good news, and we could easily have talked about Kickstarters, right? Because we just had we'll mention it later, but Avatar Legends, and there have been so many Kickstarters recently that have crossed the $1 million mark, and so we're just seeing overall. It's a larger audience. The audience, it's hard to say whether the audience has changed or just the newer audience is willing to pay more, but we do see prices go up, right? And that value is still seen for a higher priced product, which is good.
Yep. So you can find Joe's blog at theschemingdm.wordpress.com. And the DMs Guild has also updated their guidelines for print on demand. We talked about this last week and maybe even the week before, how those guidelines were changing. And now they've loosened up on those requirements. And I will let Teos tell you all about that.
Yeah, so there was a minimum page count of 100 pages, which is pretty rough. That is gone, which is good because page count doesn't indicate anything in terms of value.
Right.
But if it's already published, so you still have these standards of if it's already published, it must be platinum or higher. If it's upcoming, then they'll consider it if you have at least one previous gold title. Still no word on what that means if you were a collaborator on something, like you might have done some really tiny bit. Maybe you were even an artist on it. Does that count? Hard to say.
Right.
But it's something they review, so I guess that's where it would happen. You must still use an approved designer. There are 4 currently, layout designer that is. But there is now a form to apply as an approved layout designer. No idea what that process is, but you can at least say, hey, so if you're listening to this and you know layout, I would say jump in there because these folks are going to be probably have a fair amount of work on them. Plus, it's great advertising. And there are 4 layout designers there. Only of half of them, 2 of them, have a portfolio page. So if you're on that list and you don't have a portfolio page, you should.
Right.
And then anybody else, hey, look, it's like free advertising that you know how to do.
Right.
You know, of course, drive through, but also DMs Guild, and you can link to your portfolio page. So jump on this layout, people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. High level D&D, something that we have not discussed in a while, but might be in the offing. But DM David and Alan Patrick have already discussed it for us. In a series of blog posts, DM David covers some of the challenges of high-level play, and he also shares advice provided by Alan Patrick, former Adventures League administrator and author who has run hundreds of high-level tables.
He's former?
Current? I can't remember.
I mean, maybe you know something I don't.
I don't even know what I know.
Congratulations on being fired, Alan. You heard it here. No, I think he's still an admin.
Okay, cool. So tier 4 is the end of the player characters' careers. They go on to huge adventures, but then circle back to their beginnings and bring back nostalgia and emotional resonance, not residence.
Sure.
You know, this also lets PCs and players see the growth and achievements. So at the end of most stories, especially huge, long TV shows or series of books, there's always that return to where you started to just remind yourself of why you took this journey to begin with. So that's the sort of advice that they're covering here.
I think this is great advice. I've been chopping away periodically at a blog that's a little bit about this subject of how if you look at the published adventures, they almost never come back to where they started. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's a little strange because we're supposed to actually care about where we started, but we quickly discard it, right? So I think this is really good advice that one thing that tier 4, you imagine like, well, you've got to go to the plains, but actually sometimes what really, really has that resonance is going back to your starting place, you know, whatever that campaign began with.
Yeah. Epic situations that let epic heroes shine. So rivers of lava for an erupting volcano. You want this thing that would just totally annihilate a tier 1 party. Tier 4 is just your normal situation, but things you have to account for. At high level, even these sorts of great epic things can fail to impress. So sometimes going back to smaller, more personal stakes can actually add bigger drama than these epic environs.
Yeah, and knowing when to do which is I think a key skill. And the idea, don't just do one, right? Don't just do nothing but erupting volcanoes. Is good advice.
Yep. They note that at tier 4, monsters can be a little disappointing. The hit points gained by player characters outpaces the damage that monsters can inflict. Alan raises damage so it matches the way the game it feels at lower levels deadly, right? When you can get killed by just one critical hit. At low levels, you want to make that so that can happen at high levels as well, or at least it has the possibility of happening, because the characters can, with a snap of their finger, bring their whole party back to life.
Right.
So
Yeah. DM
yeah,
David talked about a recent game where two characters were disintegrated and they were both up within a round, right?
yeah, right. It just that's high level play.
Yeah.
And DM David also notes that high damage does penalize support characters making concentration checks.
I thought that was an interesting comment that, you have this like damage, you escalate the damage so much to threaten a character, but yet we don't think about that impact on your concentration checks, which is true because those DCs just become impossible. And I had not considered that, so I'll have to think on that.
I would come back with yes, but you also have 70 other spells that you can cast. So that's
or even just the same thing again.
Exactly. That's just part of the, part of the action. David and Alan do have several recommendations. Give the characters more to do at once. And this is, of course, great advice. They have to attack the monster plus do this task over here. I mean, that's good at most tiers, but tier 4 especially, you want to give them maybe even more choices than that. Never make it they can just focus their fire on one thing, because that one thing will not last long. Limit resting by making it erasing its time, and that goes both within a session and between sessions. If you're not having your level 20 characters go 4 sessions and without giving them a rest, you're not running it right. They should not be resting at all.
Yeah, it's hard. If you have them full up, it's just so hard to challenge.
Yep. Give preferred targets the maximum number of hit points that you can, so everything doesn't die in one round. It at least takes 2 rounds. Have a warm-up act, a foe before the actual foe, so the players don't just unload on the main enemy right from the start. There's also recommendations on how to handle pacing and the demands of high-level play, like seek out uncomplicated foes to fill groups of foes so you can focus on the complex boss and all the other elements, and you don't have to worry about the spell list of 27 different monsters. It's just the one monster. Favor traps and hazards that trigger on an initiative count, because they're always going to be going. The subscription model for traps, if you will.
I like that.
Yeah. Add legendary and layer actions to your initiative tracker. So,
that's really important.
Yep. Super important. And then use average damage, so you're not rolling 27d6 every time a monster attacks.
Yeah. Good point.
So anything else on that?
It's a great 2-part series, highly recommended. I think even if you like you were saying, if you're running lower level encounters, this is still good advice here to be found. So good stuff.
Yep. After about 5th level, it's all high level play. It's just a little more high level play at tier 4.
It's true. It's true. And all you'd have to do is run a game at a convention to see that. Just, oh yeah, this encounter does not present anything to you folks. And that's my biggest advice on high level play is it needs to be fun regardless of the challenge level.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's what D&D always should do at every single tier. Is it just needs to be a great story, engaging situations, fun stakes. And they may walk all over it and just shred your monsters, and that's fine if the rest of it works. If the rest of it doesn't work, then it's all very ho-hum, right? But the reality is a lot of times when I run convention games, the players love absolutely shredding everything I put before them. That's not the problem. They're having a great time with that. But if the story is lackluster or doesn't make sense or fails to be engaging in some way, there's not much to do, then it's boring and it's like a bad miniatures game, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. We will be getting a TV show of Blades in the Dark.
What?
By John Harper. Yes, John Harper created the RPG, and it has been optioned by UK's Warp Films. You can read all of that at www.screendaily.com. So
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
we'll see more and more of this, I think.
Yeah, it's a game that all of my indie game designer friends talk about.
Right.
So seeing this sort of, I don't want to denigrate the game. It's not D&D, that's all, right? So we're seeing all this D&D news, books,
Right.
movies. Having these other role-playing games getting this attention is great news, and this is a good one to focus on.
It will be surprising if this happens more, right? Because you think of a lot of these role-playing games that are not based on a licensed property, right? They're their own concept. They have really neat ideas.
Right.
And so you could see how someone could go, you've done all the work for me that I would normally do to create a compelling world, compelling NPCs, and even stories. It's all here. And I have an audience. Hey, let's do this, right?
Yeah. Why not? And speaking of let's do this, Avatar Legends role-playing game ended at $9.5 million in over 80,000 backers, which is a new role-playing game record. As Teos mentioned earlier, we're getting more and more games, role-playing games that are breaking the $1 million mark. Well, we almost had a $10 million role-playing game Kickstarter. That's not even D&D, based on the Powered by the Apocalypse rule set. So it wasn't even a unique game. It was one that was co-opting an already intact rule set. So congratulations to Magpie Games, and good luck now creating a game that is going to capture the imagination of 81,567 backers.
Yeah.
So any other news to throw out, Teos?
Just a quick mention that there is a Kickstarter out there, That Feeling When Oracle deck by Lisa Penrose, and that's worth checking out if you want to see very cool looking cards, a sort of Tarot style Oracle deck. Check that out. That's on Kickstarter now.
All right. Excellent. Now, with the news safely put to bed, we will start strong again. We will continue our discussion on intro adventures for D&D, looking at the opening sections of the hardcover adventures published by Wizards of the Coast. We'll look at how good they might be for new DMs and new players, and then give some tips on how to make them work for you, even if you're a new DM or even if you are running for new players. Last week, we looked at the beginnings of Horde of the Dragon Queen and Princes of the Apocalypse, meaning this week we get to look at Out of the Abyss and Curse of Strahd. Whew. Shall we do this thing?
Good stuff.
All right.
Let's do this. This is epic material here.
Yep. So let's start with Out of the Abyss, which was the third hardcover that had an actual opening. Right. Because the Rise of Tiamat was for high-level characters. Yeah. So when you pick up Out of the Abyss and okay, I'm going to run this, what are you getting into? What you're getting into is a really cool idea that had a lot of good parts in place, but it was a heap of work to sort out, and it takes a lot of thinking, a lot of energy, and a lot of planning to work with a random group of players, or even a group of players who you might know.
Right.
It can be worked out to become a great prison break or heist story. But if you're going to run it that way, you want to step back and look at what makes those prison break heist sorts of stories work, because they are a very specific kind of story. And if you get off track, or if you start presenting to players things that the players aren't too keen on, it can go really wrong really quickly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what I tend to think about this scene this in the beginning, this introduction piece, which is all about the characters starting as prisoners. I have a couple of thoughts, but the main thought is something that I had as an experience when we were writing one of our early Ashes of Athos adventures, and we wanted everybody to get onto a particular caravan. And this involved posing as slaves, because back in this time, just as the most recent Out of the Abyss, the idea of being slaves wasn't the same thing it is today. It was seen in a different light. and now we would go back and make different choices. But when we were writing that adventure for Ashes of Athos, the idea of posing as being prisoners, captives, whatever, it was, how to write that scene. What we did is we provided a bunch of, here's what you can't do. Here's what won't get you onto this caravan. And then what would happen is players would come up with ideas. The DMs would cross-reference with what we said no to, and then try to figure out whether they should say no to that, which is totally the wrong type of play you want.
Right.
You want to actually be saying yes and then create a neat scene about it to see if they pull it off. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of like that, in that this scene, we get sort of all this information, maybe too much information, but then we're not sure, can they break out and how do I adjudicate that? It almost doesn't tell you what to do about that. Mm-hmm. And then it provides you 3 ways they can break out. But it's not clear whether everything else should get a no or how to work with it. And it's just the kind of thing that I think creates tough play on both sides. Like a player might go, okay, it says that I started with a piece of metal. Mm-hmm. Can I do the following? And you just don't even know. Can I escape now? Like, I kind of want an indication from the adventure. Is this a time when I can escape? I don't even know. Like, if I open the door, will I round the corner and face a whole bunch of guards? It's just, there's almost, it's that kind of situation that's very difficult for players to feel empowered, and they don't feel cinematic about it, right? They feel constrained and maybe frustrated.
Right. Yeah. Anytime you start with the characters as prisoners and they don't have any equipment or they have very limited equipment, that's hard immediately for new players unless you present it in the right way, because during character creation you're probably saying, hey, you're proficient with long swords and you can cast these spells, and you go through the list of everything they can do, and then you instantly turn around and say, oh, by the way, you can't do any of that because of the situation you're in. And one of the great things about D&D as a role-playing game is it's different than a board game, because in a board game you only have certain things you can do. It's all limited, and you can only do a move, right? And then draw a card and then do this, and that's it. D&D, you can do anything, except if you're in a prison, and then you really can't do anything.
Well, and you're at odds here, because maybe your players decide, I don't have enough information, so I'm going to do nothing. Or maybe they say, hey, I'm a hero, I should try to break out.
Right.
But the DM has these all this information about the tasks you're given to do in a particular day and the NPCs. And so the DM sort of wants to probably take longer before they escape, so that these things get to establish themselves. You describe the NPCs, you create situations, you create some drama, and then they'll get an opportunity to escape. But the players may want to short circuit that because they don't know that other stuff's coming. And so it's like you're putting both entities at odds with the design, right?
Yeah, it's for sure. And, for new players, a lot of times what you want to do is, provide information and then provide choices. When you're a prisoner, it's sort of limited, both the information and the choices. So in order to get information, you can either do the exposition dump as the DM and just explain everything that they've been through in sort of a rote list, or role play it out. But if you role play it out, you're role playing this miserable experience where they're getting beaten and shot with poison and threatened constantly. and so, if a player isn't signed up for that, doesn't want that sort of experience, you sort of have to massage things around to get to the part that the players want. Yeah. And if you have a group that loves role playing and loves this sort of thing, you could spend several sessions doing this, slowly building up their equipment and slowly making the connections with the other prisoners or with the guards that they're going to need to get out. And that's sort of the one side of the prison break trope story, is that very carefully planning things out. And that can be a lot of fun. And you could have whole sessions that's all about getting a dagger and a spell component.
Right. And that's where I think, the design of this is a little bit of everything and maybe is weaker for that, right? Because
Right.
you're not sure what element to lean into, and we're not given the information that a new DM, like if we're going to present all the options, then this probably should be a bigger section with more information and more possibilities. But as it is, it's confusing, and there's some elements that make it more confusing, right? So one is Appendix A gives you backgrounds.
Hmm.
And we've seen this in several adventures, and we'll see it more. These tie to other chapters is the problem.
Yep.
So you might have a background that you think might apply here, or that you're supposed to do something with fairly soon, but it could be, months of play later that you're going to get to that. And it can be confusing, including for the DM. So Power Score RPG has a guide for most of these adventures, and this one of the things that I like about it is that he provides specific pages for each of the backgrounds, so you know when they'll activate.
Nice.
And you can just make a note as DM, like, all right, when I get to page 236, that's when this thing will finally do something.
Yeah.
But the players may not know that, and they may, be asking around and causing this.
Yeah. So the very opening box text tells you this is the first thing I go to when I'm running an adventure or reviewing it or whatever. Go read the opening box text, because that tells you where the characters are going to start and the information that the characters are going to start with, so they can start making their choices. And it starts, captured by the drow. You wouldn't wish this fate upon anyone, yet here you are, locked in a dark cave, the cold weight of metal tight around your throat and wrists. You are not alone. Other prisoners are trapped here with you. And then it gives the background of who is holding you captive, gives you lots of reasons to dislike this drow priestess, who constantly berates you, mocks you, so on.
And I mean, that's the elephants in the room, are these 10 NPC prisoners who are with you, right?
Yep.
And they are, on one hand, it's really rich. Like we get these paragraphs, and each one has something interesting about them. One is, were rats. We have obviously mentally ill, hidden mentally ill, unknowingly mentally ill, sacrificial do-gooder, dumb orc stereotype. I mean, It's almost like a list of the things that these days we say we shouldn't put in adventures.
Yeah.
But there's more to that. It's not just that.
Right.
But they're complicated. And complicated is good because they can stand out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also an amazing amount of load for the DM to try to impart these folks. There is some guidance, like that you can hand off some of these NPCs to the players to manage, but it's a lot. And these NPCs have information to impart while they have all these quirks.
Right.
They have goals that may become the characters' goals once they escape, like let's go to this particular city together. So it's a lot that's riding on these NPCs. Yet some of them may die, and so this is a big load that complicates this scene tremendously, right?
Yeah, and the twist is they're very useful in a lot of ways, but you're not really sure how useful they are, not just in the immediate escape, but in the overall story. It doesn't say this character will be super important in chapter 7, so you might want to keep them around.
Yeah.
So as the DM, it is useful to hand off NPCs to characters to run the combats with, but you obviously are always the one in charge of the story elements, role playing that character, providing information, making decisions, and so on. And if you have a bunch of new players, you don't necessarily want to hand them 2 stat blocks each to also run in addition to their characters.
Yeah. I mean, so what do you think about this design? Like, we're obviously, we both are of the same mind that this is a lot for a new DM or even an experienced DM. But, do you think that D&D should just go like, hey, sometimes we're providing you with tough stuff to run like this, and just try to better explain it? Should it break it down into being a particular experience? Like, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, my thought is at lower levels and for products like this, it should be as easy to run for new DMs as possible. And that doesn't mean making it easy to run, it means making it easier to run.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like I said at the beginning, there are all the parts in place to make something really fun here. I think it just needed to do a better job saying, here are 3 ways you could run this.
Mm-hmm.
1, immediate breakout. The characters are here. They've gathered these items, and all of a sudden there's an attack on the prison system. A guard flips the door open, and they have to escape.
Right.
The obvious route is over this bridge. That's where they see. So run for it. A few things attack them as they're running. Boom, you're done in the first session. You don't have to worry about role playing it out. You can get into the main part of the adventure. 2, make it a mixed thing. You can role play for, here are 6 encounters that will give the characters all the information they need and the means to escape. Or 3, if here are 6 more encounters that you can put in, and this gives the full role-playing experience of gathering each piece that they need to escape, a key, a weapon, spell components, lockpick set. Gather it all together. Now you can do the full prison break thing. And so, I don't even think it would take more words. In fact, it might take less words to do it that way.
Right.
But so you're giving the DM the choice of ways to run it, and then they can mix and match and say, well, I do want to do a little bit of role playing, so I'll pick 2, but then I'll just jump right into the combat after the first 2 hours instead of the first 2 sessions.
I agree with that. The other thing is the setting is great, right? Velkenvelv is this cool caves along a chasm with rope bridges joining the caves and then joining to hollowed out stalactites, that are suspended from the ceiling. Right. I mean, it's super awesome, right? You are in this drow outpost. I mean, it's just amazing. And what happens is you get like all this information, like all the NPCs, okay, different ways this can play out, breaking out type stuff, and then all these locations. Right. And that's where, if you break things into scenes, mm-hmm. it would be a lot easier to handle too, right? You could really have it be, you've been imprisoned. Now you've got to go on this work detail, meet some of the NPCs, see some of Velkenvelv, then get back, and maybe one of the NPCs tells you, we've been trying to escape for a while. To escape, we would need X, Y, and Z, right? It's just one way it could happen, but it could be, that would be way easier to run. And you'll hear a lot of organized play DMs rave about the D&D Encounters program. Mm-hmm. And while it tended to be a little bit sort of like, okay, today we're doing this one room or 3 connected rooms, it was so easy to run. And I ran these, and I agree, like, as much as I like complicated stuff and everything, like, I would just be on my treadmill mm-hmm. reading this one page, and then I would think of what to add to it. And it was a joy, because it just wasn't hard. It was so easy to just read over this and go like, oh, cool. And then I would inject all this flavor, and you mastered it. Whereas I feel like most DMs would read all this material, and they're going to skip something. The NPCs are going to be dull, or the location's going to be dull, because doing all of it, it's like you'd need a degree in adventure writing and running. I mean, it's a lot.
Just off the top of my head, cut it down to 6 NPCs, and assuming 6 players. If you have 5 players, 5 NPCs, and the very first scene or 5 scenes is each NPC is matched with a PC doing a thing, and you get a no more than maybe 15-minute, 5-minute. Possibly of them interacting, getting the information, then they can go back. Now all the players are listening, so they're getting the information too.
That's cool.
But then then you can do that in a half hour or less. People aren't waiting forever, and it's more reasonable in the scene, right? If you've got a bunch of prisoners and you don't send all the 6 that came in together off to do this thing where they're all together, because that's just asking for trouble. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So while it would make more sense to do that as a game master to make the game run more smoothly, it doesn't make sense in the story.
What's also neat is then you could say after that one scene, hey, this is your NPC to run once you escape.
True. Yeah.
Assuming you liked it, right? Like,
right.
And you can swap if you want, but now you've got you know something about them, so it would make more sense to run them.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this whole eventually the characters escape, and they go off into the Underdark, and they have to go one way or the other. And a lot of that's going to depend on what NPCs survived and what they're telling you, so that you choose to go towards this town or that town or whatever. One thing that's interesting is the adventure is really unclear around levels and the XP, because this, I think, still sort of had the mentality of XP rather than milestones.
Right.
So they have things like you can throw a Vrock in that's like wounded,
right,
and has spent most of its powers. Well, if you do that, you get some XP. If you don't get that, right? And so it can really vary widely. They're probably second level at the end of this, but it's a little uncertain when you read it.
Yeah. I mean, there are essentially three ways to go, right? You can have them acquire tools and weapons.
Mm-hmm.
You can have this drow guard betray the leader in a bid for his own power, so he will help you escape. Or there's a demon attack that creates a distraction. And what I did was I did all three.
Yeah.
I did the, slowly acquire these tools and weapons. And I actually had them come in. What I think I mentioned this before. What I did was, rather than saying to the characters, you're starting in a prison, what we did was, you have been asked to go into the Underdark and pose as prisoners to find someone who was captured by the drow. So the people that ask you to do this help you conceal lockpicks, help you conceal weapons, help you conceal spell components on your person, fake skin, other ways that you can get this in. So they started with some resources, and they knew that they were gathering information to find out where this person they were supposed to find might be. So that was their goal. So now they had a goal of what to do, and that goal helped them decide when it was time to move forward. So once they got the information, oh, was there this person here? Yeah, she was shipped off 3 days ago on this caravan heading toward this city. Okay, now they've got that information. Now they've got this. Now you throw the demon attack in, and while this chaos is happening, they can escape. Yeah, have a few demons fly their way just to throw in some battle. But what that did for me was, I had it happen on a bridge with all the NPCs and all the PCs, and the demons were attacking, and any NPCs that I didn't want, Vrock came down, grabbed, ate, and so that gives you the chaos of it, and now you're getting rid of NPCs you didn't want.
Yeah, and this brings up another thought that I had about this. So, I like that a lot, but we have this amazing map and this amazing situation or this location, and yet nothing really digs into that. The material as it's presented, it's very easy for a DM to not have battles on rope bridges or between stalactites or things like that, and which is a bit of a shame, right? Like it doesn't lean into that. It's open, but then it forgets to go back and say, hey, DM, make the most of this. Right.
And really the best way to fix that is what I said earlier, which is give three variations and spell out the encounters and all the cool things that can happen if you choose a specific method of handling it.
Yeah.
So, overall, this is one of the best situations, I think, for new players or a new DM, in terms of a cool, different way of handling it. It just needs to be thought through carefully by the DM. DMs are almost better off just picking the way you want to handle it. If you know your players and know what they probably prefer, just pick that way and then create scenes within what you're given to just lead them on that path.
Yeah. And that's often what I would do too, is I would just look at this and decide, here's how I'd prefer this to go. And then just have NPCs point that way or situations push that way so that you're more naturally going to get that.
Yep. Yeah. And we go from the Underdark to Ravenloft with the introduction to Curse of Strahd. So Curse of Strahd is one of those adventures, sort of like of many of the adventures we've seen since or from before, where they say start at level 3.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to start at level 3, here's something you can do.
Uh-huh.
And so for the something you can do in this one, it's a introductory adventure called Death House. But before you get to Death House, which is stuck in an appendix, not even Appendix A, it's Appendix B, you get a really, really, really long introduction,
Yeah.
which is sort of warranted because Ravenloft Strahd has a long history in D&D. So as a brand that operates partially on a love of nostalgia, you wanna go through and give that background.
Yeah.
But that doesn't help DMs who want to know how I can run this game right now.
Yeah. For me, you know, it's sort of interesting. You have introduction, chapter 1, which is kind of also introduction,
Mhm.
and a bit of sort of how to run. Chapter 2 is kind of more introduction, but around Barovia and its people and random encounters and locations. And that's where it gets to me when, like, the intro I like a lot. I think it's really useful. It sets the tone. It gives you ideas for like how to run a horror.
Mhm.
Talks about, it gives good overviews. Like, this is one of the best adventures at saying here's what all the pieces are supposed to sum up to.
Mhm.
It does a really good job of reviewing that. But and chapter 1 does a pretty good job with the fortunes and Taroka deck and all that. But it's chapter 2 where I just start getting to like, okay, I'm supposed to learn about all these NPCs, and I haven't even gotten to running anything yet, and I'm already, on the third section of this adventure, which is chapter 2, and that's where I'd love to have seen this handled a little differently. Sort of like we talked about before, like, to introduce things in phases, right? Don't give me volumes to read. I read a little, do stuff. Read a little, do stuff is way better for me. I think
Yeah.
probably for most DMs.
Yeah. I mean, part of the issue with this, with the introduction to this, is that the adventure itself is all over the place. You could go in many different directions. You could do many different things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you're going to do that to a DM, you want to at least start solidly so they're
Yeah.
standing on solid ground. And this doesn't really even do that.
Right.
um this is where a great integrated introduction adventure, opening adventure to get you to third level, uh would set that solid base, and then let the players go off from there.
And that's what's tricky, because even if you use Death House, you still need to, because Death House takes place in Barovia, you still
Mhm.
need to get them there. And it recommends using the easier creeping fog situation,
Right.
but it's still a sort of complicated. It's made complicated the way it's set up, and,
Yep.
and encouraging the DM to read all of this stuff. When what would be ideal is, all right, let's tell you a little bit about the overall adventure, and then let's run you into a mist scene
Yep.
and immediately into a Death House like thing, either Death House or something else that we can run that. And after that one session, we can go and read more about the rest of the village and whatever. But let's start somewhere, because otherwise you're just reading for hours. And,
Right.
and I don't think DMs do that very well.
Right.
It more likely is they read it, forget it, and then they're just paging wildly at the table, which is not what you want to do as a
Yeah.
DM.
Yep. So I mean, what Teos is talking about is some box text to start the adventure would be: you were wandering through the woods and now you're surrounded by mist. Boom. The mist parts, and ahead of you you see a large mansion sitting on the outskirts of a town in the distance. In front of the house mansion are two children, right?
Mhm.
So that gets you to
Death House.
Death House. Then maybe within the first few rooms of Death House, or an NPC. Oh yes, the town in the distance. That's Barovia. That's the village. It's run by blank. All right. So now the DM is learning as the players are learning,
Yeah.
which helps. And then you learn a bit more. And I mean, they do that with Strahd. They introduce Strahd in Death House through a note that he sent to the people that used to own the house, about how he's their master, and they might have think that they summoned him, but it does not work for them, and he wants nothing to do with them except to see them suffer. Hooray. And I mean that's great. That's the sort of thing that an intro adventure can do, not just for the players but for the DM.
Yeah. What do you think about Death House has a reputation for being correctly named, let's say.
Yeah.
TPKs, multiple character deaths. Is that good? Is that what we want? I mean, it is
Yeah,
Ravenloft, but
yeah. I liked, I love the intro to Death House with the two children, who are saying there are monsters in the house. Could you come deal with the monsters in the house? And even if players say no with the fog, they have no choice. Uh, so it's creepy. It's a wonderful way. For me, it's about 20 rooms too big
sure.
and about 1.5 times too powerful, uh, because when they get there's 3 levels to the house, well, 4 with the attic, and then there's a dungeon basement.
Yeah.
I think the attic or the house itself has 20 some encounters, and then the basement has about 20, not encounters but rooms.
Yeah.
And to get to someone to 3rd level, you want to go quicker than that, I think. So I would have done 20 upstairs, maybe 10 downstairs. The main monster downstairs is a shambling mound, which is a CR5 creature. So all the characters are level 2 by the time they meet them, hopefully, but by the time they meet the shambling mound. But yeah, that's going to be a lot of that death in Death House.
Yeah, it's painful. Yeah, I tend to think that as much as I grew up on multiple characters and lots of torn character sheets, I have binders full of dead characters. I think these days people want more of a story and less of a grind experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to think you drop down that lethality. Unless you want to do something like Adventurers League when they did their AL season for this. They had a rule of if you died, you were returned by the mists with a dark gift, and sort of as a creepy way of you are tied to this land now. And I think that's a neat option too that could have been used here. And then death is still freaky and you don't want it, but it's now part of the story rather than make a new character.
Yeah. I mean it is rough. It is rough. There's no getting around that. But I mean, my overall thought on this was, if you're going to put this in here anyway, make it part, right? Make it a vital information providing, plot driving thing. Make the reading of the Taroka deck part of that 1st level adventure.
Yeah.
Right. Just
wonder,
do it.
I have 2 thoughts about that. One is the start of level 3. I wonder if there was a sort of directive at Wizards that was saying like, hey, feed off of the starter set. And that initially they were like, hey, our adventures should have this option. And because we sort of see it in Storm King, we see it in one of the ones we covered last week as well, had this sort of like, it feels like it should start at 3rd, but has this option.
Yeah, Princes of the Apocalypse. Yeah,
right, Princes of the Apocalypse. And so maybe they were just like, we need to think of everybody's coming into the starter set, and then at some point maybe they gave up on that. But yeah.
Well, I mean, the problem though, even with the starter set, when you're come out of that, you're supposed to be 5th, right? 4th or 5th.
Maybe. Yeah.
I don't think it was 3rd. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong. So yeah, if they didn't put Death House in here, I would have said, okay, I get it. But if you're going to take the page count anyway, and it just as easily could have been, we made this adventure, everyone's starting at 3rd level. Oh boy, at the last minute we decided we really should put a 1st level adventure in. So maybe okay, that's what happened. Poor Chris Perkins has to create an adventure in a week or less, with this many pages and this much art, and it's a whole thing all on its own. Yeah. So it's
what I do. So what I do like, right, is that this adventure, and maybe I should say this first. So once you get through Death House, or if you're starting at level 3, once you get to the village of Barovia, you at some point are going to have the intersection of what you hear from the villagers of Barovia, who are going to tell you, hey, the villain is Strahd. Here's what he's trying to do, right? And then you're probably going to have a Taroka deck reading. And one thing that's bizarre here is it sort of says to the DM earlier, here's how to use the Taroka deck. Here, go ahead and run your reading. And then it says, if you run a reading for the characters in person, use those new results. Which is really weird to me because I've done all this prep. Why would I throw that all away? I would just tell them what, but okay. So what that does, the combination of talking to the villagers and getting these Taroka readings, which are your goals, then leads the characters to these various locations around the map, which will play differently each time because the readings are different.
Right.
And that's both the tough part and the good part. Right? The tough part is you don't know where your characters are going to go next. And I've heard from a lot of new DMs that said this was like what destroyed their campaign was that they weren't prepped to run it.
Right.
And it was hard for them, and they'd freak out, kind of like not knowing how to handle where the players will go at any given session, and doing things like, all right, we wrapped up that piece earlier than I thought, but I need to cancel. We need to now stop playing. I don't know where we're going next. I haven't read that, or I don't remember it, or
Right. Yeah. And I mean, yes, and the adventure itself can take care of that almost in a video game sort of way where you have the map and there's 2 towns on the map and you go to the one town and then, now this opens up on the map. You can't go to here until it opens up, and that is a way to handle it that may seem like it's treading on the agency of the players, but it also lets you as the DM actually run the game, because nothing treads more on the agency of the players than not playing because you just can't get out enough in front of what they're doing.
One thing that the book does do well is it does tell you the expected levels for different areas. What it then doesn't tell you to do is how to handle when your players want to go to a tough place, which a lot of them can be particularly tough. I mean, even the Bone Grinder, which is like level 4, it is a rough level. It's a not fight everything at level 4. It's like you might be able to squeak in and out at level 4.
Yeah.
And those are things the characters don't know, and the DM isn't told how to explain that. And so it's really easy for PCs to get in over their heads.
Yeah.
What I do like is that no matter where you end up on the map, it's generally a good spot. Like, it's a good time. There is something to learn. It's interesting, well developed. There's something to achieve, and achieving it will generally feel good and progress you. So even if you go, to location A or B, that works. It feels validated.
Yeah.
I like that about it.
Yeah. If you've listened to this show for more than, say, 3 episodes, you hear a common theme in things that we say, one of which is the individual parts of this are great. The links between them are tough. The flow is tough, the flow of information. And it just reinforces the point that these books are user manuals, and user manuals are terribly difficult to write, especially complicated ones.
Yeah.
Because everyone learns differently. Everyone learns at a different pace. Everyone learns using different senses and different modes of learning. So in order to get something across well, you really have to put yourself in the seat of somebody who is using it with absolutely no knowledge ahead of time, and think of it in those terms as you're creating it, to make sure that you're not leaving out information or making information hard to find that's vital to the use of the book.
Yeah, for sure. It's not easy. And especially when you want to create interesting and different experiences than what has existed before. And this certainly does that, because you have this big map to explore, and the idea of like a very obvious villain in an obvious location everybody can see right there up that hill. There's the big castle. But you also need to know you can't go fight them now. You must find the ways, some of which is leveling, but also find these things before you face Strahd. And that makes it interesting and fun.
Yeah. So if you are going to be running this adventure as a new DM or for new players, I would suggest starting with Death House, but tone it down a bit. Maybe cut a level or two off the top of Death House, and sprinkle in some of the information that you've learned in the introduction and in chapter 1 and in chapter 2 and in chapter 3 and in chapter 4, and put it into Death House in ways where ghosts are talking to people, or where you have a book or a document that sort of explains what they're going to be learning later, because that gets you prepped for it, and it gets the players pointed in a direction that you might want them to go by adding details or omitting details as you go.
Yeah, that's great advice.
So anything else on Curse of Strahd for you, Teos?
No, I mean, it remains one of the more highly rated adventures by DMs. I think the experience overall is one that's, I mean, certainly it's based on a classic that is highly rated, and the new incarnation continues to be highly rated.
For sure. Excellent. Well, I'm going to call that a show. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you out there to our listeners, and thank you to our patrons. If you would like to become a patron of the show, we would certainly appreciate that. You can go to patreon.com/MMP for Misdirected Mark Productions. Teos, where can people find your misdirected advice on the internet?
Yes, my terrible advice can be found on my blog at alphastream.org, and you can subscribe there and get free stuff. You can also find me on Twitter pontificating at AlphaStream. How about you, Shawn?
I am not pontificating much anymore on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. You can also follow the podcast Twitter handle at MasteringDND. You can go to the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com to talk to us directly and give us your thoughts on the show. And, we have people reaching out on Twitter a lot, giving us some feedback on what they think about our topics. And we certainly do appreciate that. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production. So Teos, now that we've been through the Underdark and through Barovia, what are we going to do now?
We are going to kill some vampires.
Now, was that Dracula or the Count?
I was listening to Thriller recently, and I was badly,
Vincent Price?
Yeah.
We're going to go kill Vincent Price. Wait.
It was that or imitate the guitar solo by Eddie Van Halen. So,
there you go.